Welcome to the Wacky World of Work. I'm James Tehrani, your host, and today on the program we have a very special guest. His name is Scott Adams, and if you don't recognize the name, you'll definitely recognize his work. Of course, he's the creator of the hit comic strip Dilbert, and not to mention, but I will mention, the now-defunct Dilberito. Welcome to the program, Scott. How are you?
Good. How are you? And thanks for mentioning the Dilberito.
No problem.
It's defunctness.
Hopefully it wasn't funky.
It wasn't too funky, no.
Okay, good. So I just finished reading your book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, and I sort of feel like before we do the interview, we should do some kind of affirmation. Can we do that?
Sure. You go nuts.
All right, I'll do mine. If you want to do one, that would be great too. Mine is, I, James Tehrani, will conduct the most insightful and entertaining interview with Scott Adams ever.
Oh man, my affirmation was I was going to do the worst interview I've ever done in my life. So I guess that's the problem if they don't line up.
Oh,
by the way, I only just noticed that your tie is turned up.
Yes, it is. It's in case the viewers at home don't realize, it is in honor of Dilbert. And it's the best I can do. It was kind of hard to do this because Dilbert's tie really defies gravity.
You were part of a long tradition of people trying to figure out how to engineer a Dilbert tie so it sticks up and looks right.
Where did that come from, by the way?
I actually don't know because Dilbert was a doodle long before I thought he would ever be a commercial product. So there was some day in my past that I drew his necktie turned up. And what I was thinking or why I did it that way, I have no idea. It's lost in the memory banks of time. But I do know it looked right. So there was something about the wrongness of it that seemed right
for
the personality and the situation. Now, I'm not sure if you know that Dilbert lost his necktie for good in around October of 2014. So he's going casual to looking more like he fits in with the Silicon Valley crowd.
Excellent. So I guess we'll get back to Dilbert in a bit, but we should talk a little bit about your book. As I mentioned, it's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. Now the thing is with failure, as you're growing up, you hear things like, if you fail this math test, there's going to be some kind of consequence. You lose your video games for a week or something like that. Or failure is not an option. But your hypothesis is more, failure is the only option if you want to be successful. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, nobody chooses failure if they have the option, but we live in a world in which most things don't work. 9 out of 10 businesses don't work out. Most of us don't get to pick, the first choice for our romantic partner, every time. Sometimes you get it right, but
Sure.
Usually you fail a little bit. So failure is kind of the fabric of the world, and the question is not just how do you endure it, because the famous saying that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I suppose that's all good, but I take a more proactive approach, and I say you should actually choose your projects such that when they fail, because they probably will,
mm-hmm.
they will leave you more valuable. So, for example, if your project taught you something that is valuable for your career, or you've met people who you could network with later. So the idea is to make sure that you come out ahead no matter what happens externally.
Now, Scott, I have to ask you this. So you're a big success. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. Do people go to you, say to you, how can you write a book about failure when you're such a big success?
Well, one of the things I do in the book is show my literally dozens of business-related failures. And a big part of that point is to show you that usually famous people will present themselves in the best light, because once you become rich and famous, you've got handlers and people who will make your story so antiseptic that all you see is the quick march from nothingness to huge success with nothing in between. But the reality is, most people who are successful have been, hacking away and crawling through the mud for years before something happened. So I just tried to put it in context that, I got lucky,
mm-hmm.
But I managed my luck by having lots of opportunities for luck to find me.
Sure. Once you said, I have a perverse attraction to risk. Why is that?
That's just a personality quirk. It's not something I recommend. It's not something I think is necessarily good. It's just a fact of my personality that when something causes trouble and I'm at the middle of it, I get a visceral enjoyment from that. Now, I'm not saying that's good. I'm not putting any, there's no judgment on that. It was just
Sure.
a observation that made sense in the context of my career.
But somebody who does Dilbert, I mean, you could coast. There's no reason to take risks, so why keep doing it?
Oh, it turns out that whatever it was in your personality that got you to this point, wherever you are, whatever got you there, probably isn't going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So, I woke up every morning of my youth saying, okay, today's the day. I'm going to make something happen. Something good's going to happen, and it's going to be me. I'm going to do something.
Sure.
And then, as you say, I became successful in the Dilbert realm, but that doesn't go away. You just wake up every day and say, okay, that's done. Like, what have I done today? So I don't have a sense of resting on laurels. That wasn't anything that I don't think in my youth I even knew anybody who did that.
Sure.
Both my parents worked two jobs. I had several jobs in college. So being useful is my prime philosophy in life, right? Now it turns out that I can be useful in fairly large public ways because of my weird combination of ordinary skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to be useful because why else wake up? I could acquire all the physical pleasure I want fairly easily, but you get tired of that after a while.
Now, reading the book, I get the impression, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, had Dilbert not been successful, had it fallen flat, you would have been okay with that. You would have just moved on to the next thing.
I actually go further than that and say that Dilbert probably held me back.
Really?
Yeah, because
I wish I
take
could
my
get held back like that.
here, consider my situation. So
Yes.
when Dilbert happened, it was when the dot-com era was taking off.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in a technology area of Pacific Bell, which gave me access to really the internet technology of the entire Silicon Valley. I had an MBA from Berkeley,
Mm-hmm.
and I had an entrepreneurial mindset. So chances are I would have been working for some startup, and if the first two or three didn't work, I probably would have found one that paid off. So I think I actually would have made more money without Dilbert, which is an odd thing. So I'm still trying to make good.
I was really fascinated by your story about working in the bank, how you would do an average or mediocre or below mediocre job and you would just keep getting promoted.
Yeah.
How does that work out? That doesn't happen to most people.
Well, I have an unreal ability to do well in interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So this may be the exception, but
It better be
it's
the best ever. I already did an affirmation on it.
it might be the best ever. So far, so good. Um, no, I speak well. I guess I carry myself well in interviews, so I could get promoted very easily.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that I'm a little dyslexic and doing ordinary tasks that most people can master quite easily. I don't do well. I got no attention span, no attention to detail. So in a weird way, I was incompetent for a lot of jobs that normal people can do, but there probably was something closer to the top, sort of the leadership management area where you're
Sure.
not doing anything useful whatsoever most of the time. And I probably would have been fine in that job because nobody would have noticed my incompetence.
So I want to talk to you about you promote systems versus goals. You say goals are for losers, and you also say passion is BS. Why do you say that?
So goals are fine if you have a very simple situation and it's fairly short term. Because let's say you enter a bowling tournament,
Mm-hmm.
the goal is to win the tournament, right? That will never be wrong. At the end of the tournament, you will never say to yourself, "Gosh, I wish I had not won this tournament." Right? So that in that case, if it's simple, a goal makes sense. And in the old days, if you were a farmer 200 years ago, and your goal was to clear some acreage before winter, that was a perfectly good goal. And again, a simple environment. But now fast forward to today. And
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're looking at your career choices or what business strategy you want for the future. Now you're talking several years in the future. You're looking at this completely unpredictable, changing, morphing environment. So the odds that you were able to choose that very specific goal back in time that still made sense when you got to that time in the future is pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, I say a system is something in which you are improving your value on a daily basis.
But even in a
So,
system, you have to have some kind of objective. Isn't that the same thing as a goal?
well, directionally. So you can
Okay.
have kind of a broad directional objective. So, for example, you might say technology is where I want to be, and let's say I want to live in this area. Those are kind of larger. You can call those goals, but really they're more strategic. You're saying I like technology, I'm good at it, I would do well in this environment. So it's more
Mm-hmm.
strategy than goal. But if you to follow up in the systems, there are lots of systems I described in the book, but one of them is just layering together ordinary talents
Mm-hmm.
until the combination of those ordinary talents is something special. And I use myself as the poster child for that, because if you look at my artwork, no one would ever accuse me of being an artist, and yet that's my job. But it's because I can write well enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to win a Pulitzer. All right, I'll never win any literary awards, but I write well enough.
Mm-hmm.
My sense of humor is good enough. If I have a party at my own house, there are funnier people in my house. All right, so I'm not even the funniest person in the room in my own house lots of times, but I'm funny. I'm funny enough. So if you start layering these weird talents together, there just aren't that many people who have some kind of business background, which was necessary for the Dilbert comic in particular. A little bit of drawing skill, a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
humor, a little bit of writing, and put them all together. It's actually a rare combination. So that's a system. A system is um, gradually acquiring new skills that aren't necessarily world class, but they
Sure.
make you more special over time.
Very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the origins of Dilbert. Did you have a mentor when you started cartooning?
I did not have a mentor per se, no. I did get some good advice that set me on my trail, and I could tell you that. This is a little bit of a longer story. But no, cartooning was just one of many things I tried in the
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial realm. I tried writing video games on my own. I tried inventions. I tried a number of different startups. So Dilbert was just in the bag of things I tried, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the one that worked.
Now, you said you're a big Peanuts fan, big fan of Charles Schultz, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so in preparing for this interview, I watched a couple of YouTube videos with Charles Schultz, and he gave the same answer to the same question in a couple different interviews. They asked him, "Are you Charlie Brown?" And he said, "No, no, I'm a little bit of all the characters. My sarcastic side is Lucy, my wishy-washy side is Charlie Brown, my dreamy side is Snoopy, and so on. I think you have to be a little bit of all the characters if you're going to make them at all real." So do you agree with that? Are you a little bit of all the characters in the Dilbert universe?
I am a little bit of most of the characters, especially most of the main characters. So Dogbert has my evil side, the things you can think but you would never say out loud,
Except in your blog.
except in my blog sometimes. Yes, uh, that would be my appetite for risk again.
Mm-hmm.
Dilbert is my nerdy side, the side that didn't do well socially, but loves technology, same as me.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other characters, such as the boss, who's really a conglomerate of real people, but he's several real people put in one. Alice is based on a real person I worked with, and Wally is as well. So they both have a basis in real people. But Schultz was right.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to imbue these characters with your own personality, because you can only mine the person you borrowed this character from for so long, because you just don't know that much about that other person,
Mm-hmm.
but you know about your own, let's say, your own anger, your own selfishness, your own stupidity.
Right.
So you have to put that in the character.
So I have to ask you about Catbert, just because a lot of the people who will be watching this are in HR. So, so what is Catbert's motivation for holding people down? Is there something inherently funny about HR people?
Let me tell you the history of Catbert. That'll give you an idea. So originally Catbert didn't have a name, and he
Hmm.
was just a cat, and he didn't work in the office or anything. It was just a cat on a sidewalk that encountered Dogbert, and there were a couple of cartoons in that vein. But I got hundreds of email messages from people who said, and I quote, "We love Catbert." Now, what's interesting is that wasn't his name. I hadn't named him. He was just a cat that was going to be there for 2 days and gone.
Hmm.
But if hundreds of people simultaneously give your character the same name,
You gotta
maybe you got
go
to do
with it.
something. So now I had a problem because I didn't want to introduce a cat into Dilbert's house, but I needed to keep him around. So I said, well, what's the perfect job for a
Hmm.
cat? You know, how does that personality fit into the human world? And human resources seemed like the perfect comic fit because one imagines your human resources director as being cat-like in the sense that they don't care about the employees; they're just playing with them before they downsize them, that sort of thing.
And they're evil.
It seems to people that they're acting in an evil way when in fact they're following some rules that they didn't create. But yeah, so that was just a perfect fit between animal type and human job type.
Okay. So you mentioned, or you've said this before, that email you think was one of the main reasons you were able to get the real pulse of what people wanted from your comic strip. Is email a burden for you today? Because, I mean, you've got to be getting thousands of emails a day. I don't know how you keep up with it. And is that how you keep a pulse on what's going on in the workforce since you're not in the traditional workforce anymore?
So when I first started putting my email address in the margins of the comic as it was published, I would get thousands of emails per day. You know, anywhere from 1 to 3,000 a day, and I would try to answer them as best I could, but it was like a full-time job, right?
Sure.
Now most of them were quick answers, like thank you, I appreciate the compliment, sort of thing. Over time, though, as social media has taken over, I could go a day with no email.
Really?
Yeah, I could get zero messages on a typical day on my public email address.
Hmm.
But my blog was lighting up, and Twitter and Facebook and those things are going nuts. So I think people don't see email as a way to talk to famous people anymore
Hmm.
because I'm so accessible. You can just mention me on Twitter, and literally, within a minute, I'm reading it. Right? If you send me an email, I might get to it next week. So email doesn't work anymore in today's world, and
I see.
at least for a lot of stuff.
So are some of the stories that people send you crazier than the stuff that happens in Dilbert's office?
Um, I do have a problem sometimes if the story in reality is so unbelievable that if I put it in a comic, people would accuse me of no longer basing my strip on reality.
Uh-huh.
So I do run into that once in a while.
Do you have any
But
examples?
yeah, I was as soon as I said, don't ask me for an example because I know I can't produce one on demand. Um, so I won't try. But
Okay.
there'll be a lot of dead air here. But the point is, I run into that maybe once or twice a year, where I'll look at that and say, that's hilarious, but this couldn't possibly have happened to more than one person in one situation. So I can't write about that.
Okay, fair enough. So let me ask you this. Obviously, through Dilbert, we can get a pretty good idea of what you think is wrong in the workplace or the workforce. What do you think is working in the workforce? Is anything working? Is it just totally dysfunctional?
Oh, no, it's totally functional. Capitalism is a huge machine that is fueled by failure. All right. So it's a whole bunch, it's like science in a sense. I mean, science and capitalism have one great similarity, which is if you looked at the details, most stuff isn't working. It's a whole bunch of stuff that isn't working. But in the not working, you learn what to try next time. And you're kind of crawling toward a good result. So
Mm-hmm.
while most scientists most of the time are probably not finding something useful, most businesses most of the time are doing things that ultimately aren't going to work out either. But at the same time, both are systems, right? The,
Mm-hmm.
the employees are getting more valuable as they learn things. The scientists are getting smarter and eliminating possibilities. So these are perfect systems where they feed on failure, but the failure by its design, by the design of the system, makes everybody involved more valuable. And over time, that lets luck find you because luck looks for people who are ready, basically.
I see. What business jargon makes you laugh, and what business jargon makes you cringe?
Um, gosh, I I think the one that's bothered me the most for years is at the end of the day, because it doesn't mean anything.
At the end of the day,
Yeah,
come
at the
on,
end of the
Scott.
day, it's like how about we just leave that one out? And of course, synergy has been my great hated word for all time, but every once in a while I have to use it myself.
I love the word solutions. Everything's a solution.
Well, because everything's a problem, which I guess that's the positive way to say it. My favorite buzzword, I'm not sure, or jargon. I'm not sure I have a favorite because they don't qualify as jargon until they're annoying.
Sure. So let me take a step back. Obviously, I don't know if everybody knows this story, but for a few years, you weren't able to have a conversation because of a neurological disorder, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but I think it's called spasmodic dysphonia. Am I pronouncing it?
Nice, very
Okay.
well.
So, what person goes in front of 1,000 people at a meeting not knowing if they're going to be able to converse with that? I would be freaking out. What was going through your mind? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So the quick background on that story is I got a condition, let's call it. It's somewhat rare. It's called spasmodic dysphonia, and when you try to speak, your vocal cords clench.
Mm-hmm.
So if I tried to order a diet Coke, it would come out sounding like get the oak like that. So it sounds like a bad cell phone connection. So most times people can't understand it,
Mm-hmm.
and it certainly doesn't work on the phone. So you couldn't really make phone calls. For about 3.5 years, I tried to figure out what this was. I couldn't figure out the name of it and looked for a solution, and it turned out that there was none. It was this incurable problem. But it turns out there was one person who did a somewhat experimental new surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't call it experimental anymore, but that's what this scar is on my neck, where they rewired the nerves to my brain. And after several weeks, the nerve endings grew back together, and my voice slowly came back. But the story you're alluding to
Yes.
is I still had some public speeches booked when I lost my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the oddities of the voice problem is that, like a stutterer, I could often speak when there weren't people in the room, and I could sing. So I could sing okay, I could talk to my cat, but if a human walked in right after the cat walked out, I couldn't talk to the human.
That's
So
unbelievable.
so there was a feeling in the early days they thought this was a anxiety psychological problem, but obviously it got fixed with surgery. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking probably not. Um, so it was this weird thing, and I didn't know if I gave a speech in front of a huge audience, if it would be more like talking to one person or more like singing, because in a sense, I was repeating a rehearsed speech I'd done many times,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, well, maybe that'll just come out fluidly and without stopping to think, it'll work.
But you
So
never thought about canceling. You just said, "Let's go for this."
I actually I offered to the bookers of the event to cancel. I gave them lots of time to do that, but I told them the situation. I said it
Mm-hmm.
might work, it might. I can't promise though. And they said, well, we'll take a chance. And I got to say, if you're afraid of public speaking, you don't ever want to go to an event where you're the headliner. There are 1,000 people in the audience. You hear the introduction coming, and for no time that day or for the months leading up to it could you form a sentence. And I walked on stage under that situation, and the lights are on, and you're standing there, and the crowd is going nuts, and then they get quiet, and you don't know if you can talk. There's that moment where you actually don't know if words will come out of your mouth.
That has got to be
And
scary.
so, I stood there and I looked at the audience for a while, which a while is a different sense of time when you're in front of an audience. So, half a second seems like an hour when you're in front of people.
Sure.
And I paused and I looked around and I took a big breath and I said, well, see what happens. And I was able to talk.
And what was your backup plan if you weren't able to talk? What were you going to do?
Didn't go with a backup plan.
No backup plan.
Didn't go with that.
No cue cards or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Now, my guess is that the audience thought I probably had a bad cold or something, so it wasn't fluid and it wasn't good, and it was a little raspy and stuff. But I got through it. Yeah, I didn't book any more speeches because I wasn't pleased with the quality of it.
Sure.
Now I'm back on the speaking circuit, but that was a long several years.
Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation if that surgery didn't turn out well, so I'm very glad to hear that it did.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do comic strip creators collaborate? Do you bounce ideas off of each other? Or is it so competitive that you don't want to know what the other guy's doing? Or woman?
Well, we trade information about technique.
Mm-hmm.
So often we'll talk about, oh, what kind of equipment are you using?
Is there a comic phone like the Bat Phone that you can call?
There's not, but we often have the same editor because there are only a few comic syndication companies. So we're one degree of separation from every other cartoonist. And there are big meetings that we have once a year called the Rubens. It's like the Academy Awards for cartoonists.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to a few of those, you end up knowing most of the main guys.
Who's the most nefarious character in the Dilbert universe?
Nefarious. Define nefarious in the context of this question.
Who is the person or animal that causes the most chaos with no reason other than to cause chaos?
Well, Dogbert. So Dogbert, his enjoyment is inconveniencing other people and doing it in clever ways that benefit him in some way. So yeah, he's a trouble causer, but also a, if I can use this terrible line that only writers use, Deus ex machinus, the God in the machine. He's sometimes appears at the end of a storyline to solve everything with his superior abilities.
Which character is the most dangerous to the workforce?
Probably Catbert, just because he's in human resources. And I imagine that's the most corrosive. But I suppose you could argue that the management is always the problem. So maybe the pointy-haired boss is the problem.
Okay. So speaking of management, we write articles about not forgetting the middle manager. But you seem to think that people get stuck in middle management and they should be stuck there just because that's where they should be. Am I simplifying that too much?
My first big book that was a bestseller was The Dilbert Principle. And the idea there was, especially in the time, this was in the mid-90s, you had a situation where often the least capable technology person was promoted to management because at least they understood the people they were managing, because they came from technology. But you don't want to waste your most talented technical person. So you end up promoting the least capable person to management, and often they bring their lack of capability to the new job as well. So that was a situation I saw a lot, and it became a book. Clearly, in non-technology situations, that's going to be less the case. So I'm sure middle management has a purpose, but in every case where you can get rid of a layer of management, it's probably a good idea.
Gotcha. All right, I'll ask you one more question, then I'll let you go. I really appreciate your time. So succession planning is obviously a hot topic nowadays with baby boomers growing older. Is there a succession plan for the Dilbert strip? Does it end when you say it ends? Does it carry on?
I'm at that age where I ask myself that question on a fairly regular basis. There's a history of cartoons that have been taken over by other people. And I think it depends on the type of cartoon. If there was someone out there who could write another workplace-based cartoon, you probably would have seen it by now, and it probably would already be a big thing. So it's a very unique talent. So what I was saying before about the combination of ordinary talents gets to that question. So is there someone out there who could draw a little bit, although I've done the drawing, so they could probably copy that for the most part, well, who can write in a style that's similar to how I write and also has a basis in business that they can draw on? It would be hard to find that person. One hopes that person exists. Maybe someday I'll look for that person, but it's not going to happen anytime soon.
All right, great. I said that was the last question, but I do have one more question for you. What's next for you? What's the next big thing that you're you have your sights set on?
Well, I'm the co-founder of a startup that's called calendartree.com. And it allows you to make schedules in a way that when you send a link to someone, they can add the entire schedule and list of events to whatever kind of calendar they have. Interestingly enough, that function never existed before. We'll change the name of the company in a week or two, but right now you can find it under that. And it's up and running and doing great. And that's taken a lot of my time and energy, and we're going to launch it with about 10 new features that are really impressive. I can't wait to show that to people. So that'll be in a few weeks. So that's a huge thing. And like I was talking before, how if Dilbert hadn't come along, I'm sure I would have been working for some startup in the Valley.
Mm-hmm.
But I still get to do that. I just had to wait.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Scott Adams for joining us today on the Wacky World of Work. This was a lot of fun. If you have a question about the program, or if you'd like to contact me, you can email me at editors@workforce.com, or you can always tweet to me at @WorkforceJames. Until next time, like I always say, whatever works. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.